Good morning. Talking about the spirit of holiness. This morning we'll look at the purpose of holiness. I spent a year when I was in seminary in Gordon Conwell Seminary, north of Boston, about 25 miles. I spent a year as a chaplain at Danvers State Mental Hospital, which is a place where the profoundly retarded are kept safe and medicated. And I remember one man, from the first time I met him, he would tell me the same thing over and over. He was a guy that they had to keep there because being profoundly disturbed, they'd let him out and he would try to kill himself. He would drink bleach and things like that. It was not very functional. But from the time I came on the floor, he said, "You're holy, I'm not holy." And that was his mantra. "You're holy, I'm not holy." And I don't know why he said that. Perhaps he knew I was a seminary student, and perhaps that's why he called me holy, but it does raise a question. Who would you describe as holy? And why? What defines someone as holy? This is a question that will occupy us this morning. We'll talk about the form and function with respect to holiness, and since form follows function, we deal with function first. Look at the function of holiness. To be holy, as we've said, it's to be desecularized. Desecularized. When you think of someone that's holy or something that's holy, it's something that's been dedicated to use, God's use. And so, when we think of holy, we are to think of useful to God. And okay, so to be holy means to be useful. What does that look like? You know, we're zeroing in. We tend to think about holiness as being someone who is separated from what's bad. And what we said last week, that's not really what the word gets at. The word, it's not so much disconnected or separated from bad. It's connected to God, and in being connected with God, useful to God, used by God to accomplish His purposes. Useful. What does usefulness look like? Look in your worship folders. There are some verses. I included a couple sheets in here. A reading from Base for Grace, which is the series of 40 articles we put in book form that describes the Old Testament and looking at the Old Testament through New Testament eyes. And the purpose for the book is that it's strange. Some of the rituals of Judaism feel unfamiliar. And so the reason for Base for Grace, it follows the book of Hebrews. And what the book of Hebrews does for us, it takes Old Testament images and helps us look at them through New Testament eyes. So what are we supposed to learn from the Old Testament? Hebrews is a letter that gives us the answer to some of those questions, and that's why we put it together. So there's a reading in there. Let's read the verse from Hebrews chapter 12. It says, "Therefore strengthen your feeble arms and weak knees. Make level paths for your feet, so that the lame may not be disabled, but rather healed. Make every effort to live in peace with all men and to be holy. Without holiness, no one will see the Lord. See to it that no one misses the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many." When it describes holiness here is the image. It's an image of a group of people walking along the path. Some have weak knees and feeble arms. There are able-bodied men and women who are clearing the path as best as they can so that those who are crippled can have an easier time navigating the path. These who lag behind are the holy ones. Again, they can walk a bumpy path. They're not clearing the path for themselves. They're clearing the path because there are some with weak knees and feeble arms who cannot navigate the path as well as those who are able-bodied. The holy ones have lagged back. They could be going ahead faster, but they're lagging back, clearing the path so that those who can't navigate it will have an easier time. These are the holy ones. To be holy is to walk alongside those who cannot walk alone. In the worship folder, there's an article there. It begins, "Be holy because I am holy." It's a reading from Base for Grace. We're just going to take, and I'm going to read through one of those readings several different times during the message. And if you've got the sheet, and if not, just listen. "Be holy because I am holy." That's found twice in the Bible, in Leviticus and in 1 Peter. Question, what does it mean to be holy? Then from Hebrews, "God disciplines us for our good, that we may share in his holiness. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. Therefore, strengthen your feeble arms and weak knees. Make level paths for your feet, so that the lame may not be disabled, but rather healed. Make every effort to live in peace with all men and to be holy. Without holiness, no one will see the Lord." What does holiness look like? When we think about holiness, we think about people who lead the pack morally and spiritually. People who are advanced in praying, Bible reading, giving, and fasting are candidates for holiness. This picture paints a different picture. People who are holy strengthen feeble arms and weak knees. They make level paths so that the lame may not be disabled. The Jewish Christian community addressed in this letter had split. Some had dropped out. They had decided to forsake the assembling of themselves with other believers. Chronic hardship had eroded their commitment to walk with God. Others trudged on. These believers considered themselves to be the holy ones because they toughed it out and pushed on. They looked back reproachfully on those who weren't keeping up. We don't express holiness when we endeavor to surpass others in practicing spiritual disciplines. We share in his holiness when we lag behind in order to help those who aren't able to keep up. Holiness is expressed alongside others, not out in front of them. We are being holy when we slow down and walk alongside those who are weary and about to fall by the wayside. When we are holy, we are concerned not merely for our own spirituality, but also that of others, especially those struggling. See to it, brothers, that none of you has a sinful, unbelieving heart that turns away from the living God, but encourage one another daily, as long as it is called today, so that none of you may be hardened by sin's deceitfulness. What does it mean to be holy? It means to be useful. It means to be helpful. Helpful. Holiness is expressed alongside others, not out in front of them. It makes sense when we think of Jesus. He entered the world through a womb. He entered the world with the afterbirth that spilled onto the straw in the feeding trough. He didn't separate himself. You don't get the sense if Jesus defines holiness, he was advanced, but he didn't really posture himself out front, did he? He came to us, dwelt with us, did not separate himself in any sense from us, entered this world the way we enter it. Didn't have to. That tells us about holiness. Holiness doesn't separate from those who are struggling. It moves into their world in order to assist them. The seventh step of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous has a line in which it's dealing with somebody who is trying to deal with their addiction, has to get to the resentments that are at the root of it, the thinking problems that are at the root of it. And so what happens in the fourth and fifth step of Alcoholics Anonymous, people do a fearless moral inventory. They express that to another person. I'm one to whom people have, because I have a reputation for being willing to do that, because I'm always willing to do that. It's a time when somebody's trying to get serious with their life, trying to find a way to continue to practice conscious contact with God in order to be restored to sanity. That's what the program is about. It has a line, "Remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my," and it could have used a lot of words. "Remove from me every single defect of character that stands in the way of my happiness." It doesn't say that. Holiness. It does say that in a way. "Remove from me every single defect of character that stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me grace as I go out from here to do your bidding. That's what step 7 is about. I got a question. Let's make 2 lists. Defects of character that stand in the way of happiness. We're not going to have a discussion. You might think about them. Okay? You got some? Defects of character that stand in the way of usefulness. Are there some crossovers on the list? Are these the same lists? No. The things that stand in the way of usefulness don't necessarily stand in the way of happiness. More importantly, the things that stand in the way of happiness don't necessarily stand in the way of usefulness. Useful people have a joy about them, but you put your finger on the life, and useful people have been through some difficult things. Why am I saying this? Holiness is achieved by removing that which stands in the way of usefulness. Holiness is about appealing to God to remove that which stands in the way of usefulness. Question. What would you like to be rid of? What would you like to be rid of? Think of circumstances in your life. Think of relationships. Think of the boss. Think of the people you work with. Think of the place you work. Think of relationships. What would you like to be rid of? If you could just go snap it out of your life. Okay, everybody got something? We all got some things. Does that thing stand in the way of happiness? That's why we want to get rid of it. Again, there's nothing wrong with this. Yeah, we want to get rid of it because difficult things make us unhappy. Habits that we have, circumstances that we're in, going to work. Okay, so we got that. Does it stand in the way of happiness? Another, you know what I'm going to ask next, don't you? That thing you want to get rid of? Does it stand in the way of usefulness? Would you be more useful if that thing was gone? If that relationship was completely cleared up? If you went to work with a bright, beaming smile on your face? Would you be any more useful? It's an interesting question, isn't it? Because what stands in the way of happiness doesn't necessarily stand in the way of usefulness. And that's what holiness is about. It's about what's being useful and what's being helpful. Does physical infirmity stand in the way of usefulness? Some of you suffer. I don't suffer physically. Some of you do. Does that get in the way of usefulness? All depends. If we were to come along somebody else suffering, I could feel bad, but you would sympathize. Your heart would go out to that person. Is it useful to be compassionate? To be able to enter into the experience of another person, to say, I know. Relational problems. Will you be more useful if every relationship in your life was clear and clean and unconflicted? Huh? You'd be happy, but if you came alongside somebody else with a relational problem, you would be able to sympathize from a distance. You wouldn't be able to enter into. Does distress and difficulty and hardship get in the way of usefulness? You know where I'm going with this, right? What stands in the way of usefulness? Not oftentimes the things we want to get rid of. Now, I'm not saying jump up and down if you have relational problems. I'm not going to. But when we think of holiness, it's removed from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness. And that's what holiness is about. Holiness doesn't mean that we exalt in these things. God, thank you so much that I hate my job. Come on. Let's be real. God, thank you that I hate my neighbor. Every day I get up and I'm so thankful that he won't rake his leaves. I am so grateful to be downwind and to have all my neighbor's leaves blowing into my yard. Am I leaking a little bit here? If you, don't tell my neighbor. No, it's okay. It doesn't mean we exult in these things. It means we endure them patiently. Remember those baskets? You know what it means? We think twice before we put something in the bad basket, doesn't it? We think twice before we put something in the bad basket. Bad, with respect to happiness, is not bad with respect to holiness or usefulness. You know what the problem is when we put something in a basket? It stays there. And then we get angry that it's there. Once you place something in a basket, you will hold somebody accountable. Listen, once we assign good and evil to something, we will hold somebody accountable. That's why we've got to be careful. Now, we are going to assign good and evil to things. It's in the genes. And they did it way back. We do the same thing. Now, here's the deal. It's not don't assign good and evil. It's think before you do. What are you shooting for? If you're shooting for happiness, different things go in the bad basket. If you're shooting for holiness, those things don't go in the bad basket. And again, I think you got my... If you're shooting for holiness, you're shooting for usefulness. We assign good and bad differently. Form follows function. Let's think about the form of holiness. Look what it says. 2 Corinthians 4, 5 through 12, for we do not preach ourselves, but Jesus Christ is Lord, and ourselves as your servants for Jesus' sake. For God, who said, let light shine out of darkness, made his light shine in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Christ. But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed. Perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not abandoned. Struck down, but not destroyed. We always carry around in our body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be revealed in our body. For we who are alive are always being given over to death for Jesus' sake, so that his life may be revealed in our mortal body. So then, death is at work in us, but life is at work in you. Form follows function. And if the function is to be, do you remember what the function of holiness is? The two words? Do you remember? Useful, helpful. Form follows function. What type of form? If we're going to be made useful, what is he going to turn us into? A jar of clay. A jar of clay. That's an earthenware vessel. And so here's the image. Remember we talked last week about the difference between Old Covenant glory. Glory is like light. And the Old Covenant glory, they really had to go, holy smokes, it was light. There was a sense of radiance. And what we learned is that Old Covenant light differs from New Covenant light. New Covenant light is so much more glorious, and it's describing the people to whom and through whom this light is transmitted. You got the drift there? And here seems to be the difference. When you've got light that's not as intense, you need a brighter vehicle. If the light is not as intense, you need a brighter person. If, however, the light is surpassingly brilliant, you know what? You don't need to be a brilliant person to reveal and reflect a surpassingly brilliant light. You can be a jar of clay. You know what a jar of clay is? It's an earthenware vessel. And this is kind of a nice image. Jar of clay, it's kind of homey, it feels like, okay, Poor little old me. I can't do much, but God can shine his light to and through me because I don't need to be a great speaker, and that's true. And I don't need to be polished, and that's true. And I don't need to be bright and shiny, and that's true. All those things are true. But the image of being a jar of clay is not quaint here. It is painful. What it says. We are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed. Perplexed. But you know what it's saying here? Do you know what it means to be a jar of clay? It's to be put in circumstances where you're getting pressed by things that you don't want to be pressed by. That's what it means to be a jar of clay. It's not a quaint image. It means that you're not set up on the mantle out of harm's way. If you're going to be one to and through whom the surpassingly brilliant light is transmitted, this is what will happen in your life. You will be pursued by things you do not want to be pursued by. You will be perplexed. Why are you doing this? Why is this happening? I wanted to serve you, and now I find that people are distancing themselves. Persecuted, perplexed, persecuted. Again, I'm not jumping up and down about this. It just is what a jar of clay. It's just the picture here. Punched. So here are the P's. Pressed, perplexed, persecuted, punched. Subject to ordinary treatment. We think that something is holy, because the church I grew up in, the holy thing went and was treated very carefully. I was raised Roman Catholic. And I remember they would take these golden chalices and they would pour the juice. Well, we have plenty, but they were poured in these gold vessels. And the priest would get them and take the rag and wipe them very carefully. We couldn't touch them because they were holy. And so they went, after they were used, you take them out of this special thing that was locked. Unlock it. This little gold thing, and you take the chalice out, and he carried very carefully and put it on the table. Very carefully filled it, and we poured the water so he could wash his hands. And then he put the juice, and then he drank and wiped very carefully, because that was holy. That's what you do with holy things, right? You put them on a mantle so that they are not disturbed. You put them inside a protective enclosure so that nothing bad can hit them. Do you know what God says? You know what holy is? Being a jar of clay. Not getting put in there. Getting put in the ground so as people walk up, bumped it, just a jar of clay. Subject to ordinary treatment. That's what it means. That's what goes along with being holy, it seems. God's holy things are useful, but they don't get placed out of harm's way. They're like everyday dishes. Again, when we're coming up to Thanksgiving season, how many of you have good china? And tell me what happens with the good china. Does that get laid on the end table? Do you put, oh, absolutely not. What happens? You get it out, you put it on the plate. What happens after dinner? Does it go in the dishwasher? The good china never went in the dishwasher. And so then you wash it carefully. Oh, and please, God, don't let me drop it. It won't be a nice Christmas if I drop the china at Thanksgiving. So you wash, then you where do you go with it? You put it in the hutch. It doesn't go in with the other dishes. It goes in the hutch. That's where, with the good dishes and the good glasses. And okay, because we have a sense that, if we're holy, we go in the hutch. No, we don't. We get put out on the end tables. And that seems to be the image for being a jar of clay. Holiness, it's developed on mountaintops, but most of the time in valleys. And when you look at the Israelites, where they became holy, there were mountaintop experiences, water experiences. You remember what happened when they went through the Red Sea? Water on each side. Hey, whoa. And that's holy when you get to walk right through water on boats. Geez, and this is holy, and that's what it means to be holy, right? We get to walk through life. Things are boiling. We're just strolling through. Hey, what's going on? No, that's not it. There was water experience, and then there was wilderness experiences right on the heels of it. They walked through water into the wilderness, then all of a sudden, where'd you go? Why isn't there any water? Why isn't there any food? Why aren't you meeting my needs? Some of you have had that experience. You had a supernatural experience. A sense for conscious contact, and then it's like the lights went out. And so what we tend to believe is, I must not be holy. You know what the deal is? You're being made holy. Because holiness is more about valleys than mountaintops. It's more about wilderness than water experiences. No, there's both. How does God develop holiness? We're going to pick it up about halfway through the article. Halfway through the article, Base for Grace, it says, how does God develop holiness? I'm going to read on. He disciplines us. When God disciplines us, he exposes us to circumstances that aren't pleasant at the time, but painful. This discipline produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. Why does God allow us to experience this pain? What does he hope to accomplish? God uses discipline to teach us to look back over our shoulder at those who are struggling to keep up. We are more apt to gently assist those who are losing ground when we've been in their shoes. Enduring times of frustration enables us to deal compassionately with those who are having a tough time. When we are able to rush from one accomplishment to another, we proudly associate with the movers and shakers. We view ourselves as upwardly mobile, on the fast track. Pride seeps into our thinking. Painful circumstances hinder us from forging ahead with our plans. Discipline teaches us to slow down. God exposes us to discipline so that we will gently and humbly come alongside those who are falling, so that we will be holy. To be holy form is a jar of clay. There's another image that combines form and function. It's expressed in a poem that we talk about. I've expressed this poem. I do it every once in a while. It's probably my favorite poem. It's from one of the spiritual mentors of the recovery movement, Sam Shoemaker. And he expresses the form and function of holiness in terms of being a doorkeeper. I'm going to read through this, and we're going to think about coming to the table. When you think about this, I want you to think about this poem captures the form and function of holiness. I stand by the door. I neither go too far in nor stay too far out. The door is the most important door in the world. It is the door through which men walk when they find God. There's no use my going way inside and staying there when so many are still outside. And they, as much as I, crave to know where the door is. And all that so many ever find is only the wall where the door ought to be. They creep along the wall like blind men, with outstretched, groping hands, feeling for a door, knowing there must be a door, yet they never find it. So, I stand by the door. The most tremendous thing in the world is for men to find that door, the door to God. The most important thing that any man can do is to take hold of one of those blind, groping hands and put it on the latch that only clicks and opens to the man's own touch. Men die outside that door as starving beggars die on cold nights in cruel cities in the dead of winter. Die for want of that which is within their grasp. They live on the other side of it, live because they have not found it. Nothing else matters compared to helping them find it and open it and walk in and find him. So, I stand by the door. Go in, great saints. Go all the way in. Go way down into the cavernous cellars and way up into the spacious attics. It is a vast, roomy house, this house where God is. Go into the deepest of hidden casements of withdrawal, of silence, of sainthood. Some must inhabit those inner rooms and know the depths and heights of God and call outside to the rest of us how wonderful it is. Sometimes I take a deeper look in, sometimes venture in a little farther. But my place seems closer to the opening. So I stand by the door. There is another reason why I stand there. Some people get part way in and become afraid, lest God and the zeal of his house devour them. For God is so very great and asks all of us, and these people feel a cosmic claustrophobia and want to get out. Let me out, they cry. And the people way inside only terrify them more. Somebody must be by the door to tell them that they are spoiled for the old life. They have seen too much. One taste of God and nothing but God will do anymore. Someone must be watching for the frightened who seek to sneak out just where they came in to tell them how much better it is inside. The people too far in do not see how near these are to leaving, preoccupied with the wonder of it all. Somebody must watch for those who have entered the door but would like to run away. So for them too, I stand by the door. I admire the people who go way in, but I wish they would not forget how it was before they got in. Then they would be able to help the people who have not yet even found the door, or the people who want to run away from God. You can go in too deeply and stay in too long and forget the people outside the door. As for me, I shall take my old accustomed place, near enough to God to hear him and know he is there, but not so far from men as not to hear them. And remember, they are there too. Where? Outside the door. Thousands of them. Millions of them. But more important for me, one of them, two of them, 10 of them, whose hands I am intended to put on the latch. So, I shall stand by the door and wait for those who seek it. I had rather be a doorkeeper. So I stand by the door. Holiness. And we think of the table. We think of what Jesus comes to do. Puts us in a place we can put our hand on the latch, and he would have us follow him into holiness and do what he does. Sometime during the course of the next song, come up, grab the juice and grab the bread, and think of Jesus coming to us, closing the distance, so that we could see what holiness is like, being useful, helpful, being a jar of clay and a doorkeeper, and so that we could in turn be holy in this world. I want to pray for us. Let me give you an update. The pieces are moving into place, and what we're doing is laying the groundwork so that we take possession of the retreat facility, which is now not so much an if as a when. We're putting the pieces in place so that when we do take possession, it's uncontested possession. Being a little bit more careful on the front side, trying to do what we can to clear everything out so that once we are in place, we will need to deal with ongoing legal matters. So that's kind of where we are, and we'll continue to update you as these pieces put together, and then once it happens, it's going to happen pretty quickly. It doesn't look like if so much now, it's just a matter of when. There's that, and just want you to know that when we do communion, we have a benevolence offering. There's some boxes on the exits, and what happens with those monies is when a part of our community here ends up being in a place where they are in need, their wallets become empty, they have the opportunity to be able to draw on some funds to be able to pay for some bills. And so on the way out, if you care to give to that, that's where that money is going to go. Let me pray for us. Father, thank you for being holy, and as we understand that, you move towards us with our needs in mind. You are certainly pure, but holiness is not just about purity. It's about usefulness, helpfulness, moving into another person's world, coming alongside them, walking with them. That's what Jesus demonstrates to us. That's what holiness looks like. It's not something that's expressed from a distance. Holiness is expressed up close, alongside. Thank you for penetrating this world, for coming and walking alongside us, for experiencing what we experience so that we can know your sympathy and express that sympathy to others as we are in touch with your sympathy for us. Continue to reveal yourself to us so that we might be holy. In Jesus' name, amen.